Order, order. Welcome to the first public session of the Select Committee's inquiry on innovation, growth and the regions. At this time, growth is the key question, the key ambition of government, and we see concerns expressed with regard to business confidence and the growth outlook for the country. The government, and I think everybody in this committee, believes that growth comes from sustainable long-term growth, comes from innovation particularly driving growing small companies and scaling up companies. And if you think about what Google and Facebook both have in common, they're both spin-outs. One was an academic spin-out, the other, Facebook, was a student spin-out. And closer to home, we've obviously got Oxford Instruments, a fantastic spin-out from Oxford University. And indeed, our first showcase innovator, AMLO Biosciences, was a spin-out from Newcastle University. So with that in mind, the committee is really interested to hear about how innovation can drive growth in our regional economies. And so that's why I'm particularly pleased to welcome our first panel who will look at, speak to us about the relationship between innovation, universities and spin-outs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of the panel in turn, going from my left, Dr. David McBeth, to my right, to introduce themselves, make any sort of very brief opening comments, and then I will just introduce yourselves and say why you're here, and then the committee will open it up to questions from the committee. So if I could start with you, Dr. David McBeth.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm Vice Principal for Enterprise and Economic Transformation at the University of Dundee. Dundee is a reasonably small but quite research-intensive university in the fourth largest city in Scotland. We are very, very good at biological sciences, and one of your members is an alumna of that process. And we have had a lot of economic impact as a result of our biological sciences, particularly in the relation to spin-out companies, where in 2023 we were named number one in the UK by Octopus Ventures for a performance with spin-outs. However, my job title includes economic transformation, and the subtext of that is that although we are very good at that within the university, the city itself is a small city with multiple deprivations and a huge amount of inequality in it. And we've been trying and will continue to try to play our part as far as growing the economy and the health and well-being of our city is concerned. We do feel there are a few things that UK and Scottish governments could do to assist with that, and hopefully I'll get a chance to say that later.
Great.
I'm Professor Irene Tracey. I'm Vice-Chancellor at the University of Oxford. I've been an academic there most of my career. I'm a neuroscientist and scientist by background. Delighted to be here, so thank you very much for the invitation, the opportunity to speak. This is something that is very close to all of our universities' hearts in the context of what we see as the potential and what we can offer and how we can serve the country in terms of driving economic growth and prosperity through the innovation that we create and the spin-out opportunity. I was asked by the previous government to co-chair a report on how we can drive economic growth for the country through the university sector, through the innovation and spin-out, and that's now 1 year old. I'm sure we'll get into the detail of that, but the purpose of that, which is as relevant to this government as the previous government, was I think the realisation that there's a lot more that we could do in this space, and if we could get the whole pipeline connected, then we'll be sort of off to the races, so to speak. I'm currently obviously in charge of the University of Oxford, which has had a terrific legacy, as you mentioned before, in the context of wanting to both do this, but also inculcate a cultural change in entrepreneurship, both within the university and for the sector. Very much work in partnership and collaborations to see how we can, as a sort of global leading university, also contribute to helping set some of the templates and some of the ways that we can, take the learnings that we've been through to other universities, and that was, again, part of the spin-out review. Personally, myself, I'm still trying to license and spin out one of my own discoveries, so I'm very close to this space, even as Vice-Chancellor. So, again, just very happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tiwari. I'm Deputy Vice President for Innovation at the University of Sheffield. I'm also the Airbus and Royal Academy of Engineering Professor in Digital Manufacturing. So I hold a position at the university which is jointly funded by Airbus. There are 4 points I would want to highlight from the perspective of University of Sheffield. First is innovation is one of the key pillars of the university's activities alongside research and education. And within that, one of the key strengths we have are translational innovation centers. For example, we have seen an investment of...
just to keep you in mind, just opening...
Yes, that's it, yeah. Yes. So that's one of the key activities we have there. Now, coming to spin-outs, one of the main activities we have seen recently is the commercialization journey that we have launched, and we have now started seeing results out of that.
We'll get to that,
okay,
Professor. The committee is very keen to highlight those issues as we opening our questioning. But I am going to start with a couple of questions to Professor Tracey on the basis the review. As you said, that you were commissioned to do a review looking at universities' contribution to growth, so spin-outs and also scale-up factors. And your review had 10 recommendations, I think it was? 11 recommendations. So as you say, it's 1 year on since the publication of that spin-out review. How would you assess the progress in implementing those recommendations? Obviously, we don't want to go through all 11 recommendations, but perhaps you could highlight a couple where you feel that has been significant progress, and perhaps others where we haven't made as much progress as you'd like to see.
We'll be delighted to. So all 11 recommendations were accepted by the government. Immediately, we were really well serviced and supported by Research England, Universities UK and the Russell Group in taking the recommendations having been approved and fast-tracking their implementation across the university sector. We had a celebration, if you like, just last month in terms of 1 year on, and delighted to report that Research England, that's been tracking this and hugely supportive in the implementation, is following the analysis, and we have 50 universities now having implemented most of the recommendations, particularly the recommendations around the equity deals, so about the actual commercial deal that you're implementing, and the recommendations we made around particularly, say, lab-based work, what that would look like in terms of 10 to 25% equity split, but other things around the commercial deal. I think one of the things with the review that we wanted to highlight is there's been a slight obsession around the equity split. One has to look at the whole commercial deal, and that's the more important thing to look at. So pushing the university sector a little bit to think about what it could be as a more standardised template for what the commercial deal should look like, both the lab-based work but also software, where there would be a smaller return for the university at 10%. That was a very key recommendation, actually a very challenging one, I would say, for the university sector to adopt because of just the need for them to sort of recruit money to put back in and reinvest. But they have embraced it. I think the timing was perfect for the review and the report. I think everybody was ready to embrace a more common set of ways of working together, a willingness to accept some more common templates about how the commercial deals would look so that you could fast track and get on with the spin out rather than having lengthy discussions and arguments that might take 6 months to a year, which will end up where you began. So all these things that we put in around the commercial deal have been readily embraced and have been implemented frankly, far quicker than we would have imagined in our wildest dreams. The other thing that we were very keen to pursue was to, and I'll just highlight two of these things. One is around the fact that for many of our regions, if you don't have a large anchor institution with a huge amount of spin-out turnover to generate the economies to run your own tech transfer office, it would be much better to have a regional one-stop shop where you'd have really high-quality signposting to the legal services you would need for intellectual property, for accessing venture capital money, for thinking about access to talent pool to run your company, working with local authorities and planning. So rather than every university having to create that themselves, work together, set up a sort of regional government-funded one-stop shop, and Research England have been supporting that model with, again, funding with a couple of pilots that they will be finishing this spring, and again, they'll learn from the pilots, and then hopefully we'll be able to roll that model out so that more places across the whole UK can benefit with realising realising their intellectual property without having to go through the enormous effort and, frankly, financial cost of setting up your own tech transfer office, which even a place like Oxford with 30 companies a year being spun out, you just about need that to wash your face running it. So this regional one-stop shop sort of model, again, it's being piloted. It's looking pretty good. Again, another thing just to highlight was a registry. You'll note, it's very hard to actually get the data to know how many companies are we spinning out, what are the deal terms, how's it going, how many have collapsed, how many are doing really well, how many have left the UK and gone and grown in the US and missing all that opportunity to invest that money back in the UK. So again, Research England have been developing a registry, which again, quite soon we hope that will be able to be more public with a dashboard, so that it'll be much easier for all of you to be able to track just how we're looking and how we compare, internationally in that regard. So those are just a few things I'd probably highlight. High funding is key. I think we'd all just stress the importance of the Higher Education Innovation Fund from Research England. Obviously, I'm going to say this, it would be remiss of me not to, but it would be really important to maintain and, in fact, increase high funding, particularly at this point in time with the challenges for many of the universities in terms of their finances. That is the key funding pot that allows us to what I call keep the show on the road. As a scientist, and having run a big clinical neuroscience department, we miss a lot of just value added to some of the ideas because there just isn't the pots of money to just take it to that extra step along the journey so that you've got confidence, you've got something really exciting here to patent, and then you're off and running. So that's a really, really important piece of funding that I would just like to emphasise at the outset.
Thank you very much, Professor Tracey. Now, you gave, there's a lot in what you said, in fact, and it's great to hear that there's progress is being made. And I think your review came out just following the review that the Labour Opposition Commission from Lord Jim O'Neill. There was also a review from 10U, the 10 universities, which set out guidelines specifically for the equity stakes. And it's fantastic to hear that such progress has been made. But can I dig a little bit deeper on that? So, because you've given a generalised view across the country. Now, you spoke about piloting, the pilot that was taking place, but you didn't say where. Are there regional disparities with the speed with which this is being implemented? And specifically on the equity stakes. So there have been examples of universities demanding 30-40% equity stakes. Now, as you indicated in your response, there's complexities there because the level of equity stake can reflect the level of support and in future investment that the university is going to do. But by having the guidelines and the sort of in a box startup guidelines to make those barriers to spin outs happening, that can really speed the process up. So you've given quite a positive assessment of how universities are doing on this. Is that the case in every university across the country? And could you just specifically talk about the culture in universities and for this is a long question, but for the technology transfer offices coming together on a regional basis, which again is fantastic, but I know how difficult universities can find it talking to each other, never mind working with each other. So could you give us a bit more detail on on the regional aspects and not only within Oxford?
Well, no, I'm happy to unpack. And most of my comments were more generic for across the country, not just Oxford specific, just to make that very clear. The data for how regionally variable it will come, I would urge you to go to Research England because they're gathering that data and they'll be able to give you the granularity of those 50 universities and at what pace they have been able to implement
Which 50 universities?
Which 50 universities and what pace they, who was straight out the gate already at the deal terms that we already had recommended, who had implemented them within a 6-month time frame, who's within a year, and who's on track to do it. Some of the reasons for the delays will be governance models of just taking it through the particular university's governance structures, so you can't just do things like that. Obviously, you've got a whole governance structure running a public university. So there'll be factors which, again, will be contributing to why there will be variance across that. There'll also be just some of the cultural changes for some of those universities where they have had an equity stake, where they have to persuade and socialise the idea that in the long run it's better to have a more competitive commercial deal because you're probably going to get more business and you'll get more investment with that, and that will just take time to socialise. But what I can say is in the discussions in generating the report, we felt we were pushing against an open door for people being willing to adopt the USIC guidelines and then be pushed for the software. So I didn't sense any regional particular challenge with people recognising that the parameters which we were working towards, which was to push a little bit more on the software and to adopt the USIC guidelines already on the 10 to 25% equity deal. And again, there's complexity with the commercial deal because, of course, there's diluted and undiluted, and this is the great difference. And that's why we put in the annex worked examples to say, actually, for most of the universities that are been at this for quite a long time, if you actually do the comparison with MIT or Stanford or wherever, we're actually already at the same level. It's just that we've got difference in the diluted, undiluted. So we worked out and showed the algorithm that you'd end up with the same sort of outcome. So again, there's a lot of mythology that we were busting in the report as well that was really important to bust. So maybe go to Research England to get the specifics about the implementation for the regions and sort of which ones were straight out the gate already there, which ones were mid. I mean, there's 50, so I won't go through it now. And they have the database in terms of looking at who's implementing them going forward. And again, UK and Russell Group will be able to give you that detail. But when you interpret that, you need to take into account it's not just, please do not just think that because somebody's slow or going to implement it, say, in 2 years, it's because they don't want to. Often it's just a combination of factors that they've got to get everybody on side, they've got to go through their governance structures. And as I say, my impression I want to leave you with was the willingness with which people were wanting to embrace this, because they could recognise, watching the universities that have been in this for 20, 30 years, that's where they had ended up, was with this level of commercial deal. Therefore, there was probably something in it, in which case they have to get there, but it just might take a different amount of time for different regions to get there for a host of different factors. Okay,
that's very interesting. I know swing Kit in a moment, but just one of the recommendations of Lord Jim O'Neill's report, which was I know accepted by the Labour in opposition, was a dashboard of spin-outs, right. And it doesn't sound as if that is in place. But no,
that's what. So in the Research England registry, there is a dashboard being created.
It's being created.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
So that
we
is
should
there.
Perhaps note how quickly that's going to be actually in place, and what the progress that's been made, and how the regional variations that we can easily spot.
You asked about culture, and that's something else that we're very clear to put into the report, is how everybody, right from a PhD student, through to a seasoned faculty, how we can create a sort of entrepreneurial culture within our university sector. And again, different universities will be at a different part of that journey. We made a recommendation that for UKRI funded PhDs, they should be given an opportunity to take a portion of their PhD time to go and work in a spin-out or with a venture capital firm, so they could get a sense of what it's like to do that. And again, that's something that we will need to track and see how well that is being implemented. I think most of us could speak about the importance of inculcating that cultural entrepreneurship at the undergraduate and graduate level, and that's something that we're all working hard on.
You mentioned at the undergraduate level, because obviously Facebook was actually a spin-out at the undergraduate level, but you talked about inculcating a culture from PhD upwards, but it has to also come in at the undergraduate and undergraduate entrepreneurship.
We're doing lots of things many of us are doing things in Oxford, is doing a lot of different things around at the undergraduate level, giving them opportunities. In fact, just one of our colleges is opening up one of their houses to be an entrepreneurship centre so that we can provide mentorship. We've been pushing very much diversity, because we have one of the interesting things that we highlighted here that will make Britain unique and different to just another Me Too Silicon Valley or Kendall Square is we're really good at the creative arts, we're really good at the humanities. A lot of our faculty want to generate social entrepreneurship that make impact, not necessarily economically, although I know the focus is the economic impact. So we shouldn't underestimate how we can create a British innovation ecosystem that will be built on British values and give us something that is unique in this world, and I think far better than anything that is out there. And if we get this right, honestly, it would be extraordinary what we could achieve in this country, and it would have that value of the deep depth we've got in the humanities and the creative arts all the way through to life sciences and tech. But I've got some very specific things that we need your help with, because we feel our pipeline's going well. What kills me is all these companies we generate, just when they are ready to go big and good and return back to the investment to the country and keep the talent pool here to generate more talent pool to run more companies, they leave because of access to capital, planning restrictions, and the talent pool. Those are the three things I can't really control very much, and that's where we need the government to help. And if you can do your bit of pipeline and we bring it together with ours, we really are in a very strong place.
Thank you. We've got a real interest. I'm going to Kit's on this area, and then Tom, and then Alice, and then Emily. Yes, Tom, you. Yeah. You wanted to come in?
I'm fine for now.
So, Kit and then Emily, yes.
So, forgive me if I'm just slightly playing catch-up on what you've explained. You covered a lot of areas. So, you've agreed effectively a kind of template equity split for basically the incubation of early-stage companies. That's basically for people who are incubating an idea to continue to use your facilities and rely upon the university. Is it necessarily involve any kind of equity injection into the business?
It does. So you've got, at the very, very early stage, you're often doing it through a Research Council funded project. And then at that point, you've got an idea, you think you might want to develop more value in that. There are some funds to do that. That's where the high funding comes in really helpfully, some UKRI funding. You might get a bit of angel investment. But generally, you're doing that still in the lab, in the department.
Okay.
You build value in that, and you've then protected the intellectual property. At that point, you've got sort of two places to go. The review was focused on spin-outs, but a huge percentage of what we also do is license. So quite often you don't want to create a company. I'm probably not going to create a company for my patent. I'm probably going to license it to one of the big corporations because that's the more effective way to make impact. Because as an academic, you want to make impact through your research as quick as possible. And sometimes the licensing route is the way to go.
You agree a split effectively of what is going to come if the thing either spins out or becomes licensed?
Yeah, at that point you've got a royalty route for the license and selling the intellectual property, or you then get, often it's venture capital money will come in to give some seed funding to help spin out that company, start to create it, and then of course you're into that Series A.
At that stage you're agreeing, effectively you're shifting the negotiation up the value chain. So you agree to some form of dilution at that stage.
So in the UK, which is the difference in the UK and the USA, generally we will have a diluted option. There'll be a non-diluted option in the US. So at that point, that's where the commercial deal and having a more standardised template of a frame of reference is what we've been recommending, so that you don't spend a long time waiting to spin out the company because you're having a negotiation with the VC funds. Yes. So what we've recommended is for the more biological life sciences, you'd sort of between the 10 and 20%. And again, there'll be a whole host of factors. The review's very clear. You don't get hung up on the equity split because there's more around the commercial deal than just the equity split. Yeah. It's around who's going to run the company. It's around other funds that might come in and out at that point. But that's what we've recommended for more laboratory-based sciences, because at that point that you've got the VC money, you might be still in the university bit, in an incubator hub or in a bioescalator or something like that. We've all built in order to facilitate that. But then when you're really solo and independent and you're off and running, at that point, that's when, and then the growth of that company, that's where we need help in the region, because that's where you need to plan really quickly. You can't wait 3 years when you're trying to compete to build a greater drug.
I understand. So a couple of questions. I mean, obviously your template deal that you've agreed has a range of values. How likely is it that universities are effectively going to compete for finite amounts of investment money by varying the equity splits that they will or will not? So Dundee might say, well, we'll take only 10%, whereas Oxford say, well, we want 20. So as a VC, I'm going to make a value adjustment between two different technologies. And then the second question I had, is just about the role of captive equity pools. So I've always been very struck at the success of Imperial Ventures, right? They have their own captive equity pool, which they can invest on certain terms. Do any of you have that? And rather than being relying on Treasury annual funding for this funding, would you rather have some kind of endowment captive equity pool which became self-sustaining?
So David wants to comment on the other bit. It's never, you never end up with, for venture capitalists, they're coming in because they're investing in the idea and the intellectual property. It's not as if we've got an IP and you've got exactly the same IP. It just doesn't work like that in science. So there'll be a particular thing that they're interested in because that's the thing they're excited about. So it's not, you're never in the option. It's not like buying a sweater in two different places. It's very specific to what it is that they're interested in, that university has generated in terms of a discovery, a biologic, a technology. So you're never in that position. So they're not saying, well, I'm going to go off to Dundee and do it there. It's they either want to invest in that idea or they don't, and then you're in that range of discussion with a whole host of factors around it. We have Oxford Science Enterprises, so we have an investment pot that builds our companies in Oxford. We created that 10 years ago. It's been hugely successful with multiple billions of capital coming in to support it. I think most places, you've got Midlands Mineforge, you've got Northern Gritstone, you've got Set Square, they're all doing a similar model of having a pot for the growth bit. But you've got to have something to translate and you've got to have something to grow. And it all starts in the lab. It all starts with that intellectual property that's coming in the university part of it. Would you like to say something?
Yes, let's hear from Dr. McBeth and Professor Tiwari
Yeah, so I think, there's a few things that Irene has said that I strongly endorse, particularly the most recent things that she said there. One of the points I would make is that generating a tide pool of funding, whether that's from a venture fund or from otherwise, can be a blessing and a curse, because ultimately that's something that has to be managed, it has to have its own rule book, and it has to have its own views about the deal flow that it sees. Most universities produce a relatively modest amount of deal flow for spin-out company opportunities, and quite often having a university-specific fund is not really the best way to grow your spin-out activity. My opinion is that the best way to grow your spin-out activity is to take deals on their own merits and have really good relations with as many investors as possible, and let the market in most cases decide what the appropriate set of terms are for a given opportunity while working within the framework that Irene and colleagues have described. A couple of quick things though that I wanted to get in. HIFE is very important. HIFE is only available in England. In Scotland, it's Knowledge Exchange Innovation Fund. It is funded at approximately 1/3 or less of the level of HIFE, and that makes Scottish institutions not as well provisioned for when it comes to that early pre-incubation stage for businesses. Now, HIFE is a devolved thing, and I know that devolved business isn't part of the business of this committee, but by the same token, I do think that there are a number of things that are available in England that have helped the English scene be more competitive that we don't have an analogue for in Scotland. And I think if the UK government really wants to promote growth through all devolved nations and regions, things like Connecting Capabilities Fund, which has been available in England for a number of years via Research England, University Enterprise Zones via Research England. If the UK government does want all of our regions, including our devolved nations, to be successful, we need to try to promote these, because I would commend these schemes absolutely. HIFE, great. Connecting Capabilities Fund, great. University Enterprise Zones, well, okay, but only available in England. And it's really, really important for people working in Scotland, especially in regions where spin-outs make up such a relatively high proportion of the growth businesses in the region, which they do in our region.
Thank you. We will consider how we can take those points forward. And now from Sheffield.
At the University of Sheffield, around 5 years ago, we started on a commercialization journey, which basically puts the innovator at the heart of the process. And to support that, there are two kind of funding sources that underpin that. There's an early stage, pre-seed funding that we use in a flexible way. Sometimes they are used to go alongside venture capitalist funding, and sometimes they are used just to support early stage companies with cash flows. That's primarily funded by HIFE. So that underpins the importance of that. We have actually seen a very positive correlation between the university funding at that early stage and the number of spin-outs coming out. Just to give you an idea, around 150k is the pounds amount funded into companies when they come out per company by the university, primarily through HIFE and internal sources. And that puts us into quite a good position. So now we have around 8 to 10 spin-outs coming up per year, which is significantly more than what we had a few years ago, which is 1 or 2. So that's the impact of that. The second point I would want to highlight is the importance of collaboration here. So Northern Gritstone was formed as a joint collaboration between Sheffield, Leeds and Manchester, funded through Research England Connected Capabilities Fund, and that provides the second stage of funding when companies are ready to grow to a stage where tens of millions of funds are required, and that's where they come in. But the two funds separately have important roles in the ecosystem to grow those organizations.
Thank you. Sorry, I think we need to move on because we need to have a lot of interest from I think Emily, George and Lauren, and then Adam is looking at regional growth. Emily.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to pick up on something you said, Professor Tracey, around how there is a real opportunity around our spin-outs having British values and innovating things that are creating solutions for the UK population. Now, we know that many universities are overly exposed and over-reliant on Chinese funds. How much risk, and this is a question to all of you, for those universities in terms of protecting that IP and having exploited in a regional basis here in the UK rather than being that happening in China. How concerned should the government and the committee be by this activity, and what can we do to ensure that that we see that innovation happening in the UK rather than elsewhere like China?
That's a big question, and I could talk for hours on that, because it's a very, very broad topic. So I think we should separate sort of, first of all, we really welcome our international students. They're hugely important to us, both in terms of the cultural breadth they bring for the experience of our UK students, but also the soft power it brings, because those students come to Britain, they spend some time here, they have generally a really good time, they go back to their countries, they often end up being quite influential leaders or, running companies, and they've got a very early informed impression of the UK. And this is hugely important role that universities play in that soft diplomacy and that soft power. So we shouldn't underestimate that. Different universities will have different financial dependencies on students, which might play out at an undergraduate or a graduate level. That's the other thing to stress. That's a slight nuance and difference there. So if you take Oxford, we're actually a very British undergraduate university. We're 80% UK students, but we're 70% international at a graduate level, and a good chunk of those will be Chinese students. I don't worry about the IP for that bit, and I think that we're overly sort of there's a path I often say that we've got to walk in terms of our concerns, which are valid, between paranoia and naivety. I think if we're too paranoid, we're going to miss opportunities, and if we're too naive, we'll miss opportunities, and we've all got to work on this together in terms of that sort of bell curve. Where we get beaten is the speed of actually developing the company and growing it. And I think we shouldn't get overly obsessed about the IP bit. I've not witnessed any problems myself in my local university, and you might want to comment on that in terms of losing IP or being concerned in the context of, again, students taking that IP and running it in China. But where we will miss out is because of just the speed at which we don't grow our companies and hold on to them in the UK. So let's not get, I think sometimes we get overly obsessed around the IP issue when the spotlight should be on speed to translation and impact. That's where we're going to win. And that's where the emphasis is, and that's where we are held back from being really unleashed because of these stops that we hit, and then seeing our companies walk off.
Let's hear from Dr. McBeth and the Professor briefly on this very important issue, and then we'll move on to regional growth.
Yeah, I mean, I think codified IP such as patents, I totally agree with Irene about that. I don't think that that's a major risk for us in having Chinese students and coding Chinese postgraduates. To me, that's not the issue. I think philosophically, if you're going to have international students, whether they be from China or from anywhere, they leave your university with knowledge in their head, and they may choose to apply that in business in their country of origin. But it's kind of what they do. I don't really feel that the country is suffering as a result of providing high quality research training to international students. I think we're probably benefiting because some of them decide to stay here and start their businesses here. It's totally different from the defence and satellite type stuff, where clearly you don't want to have certain countries acquiring the knowledge that you have. But that's about the people that you recruit into that type of research, I would say, and obviously universities are very much on top of that.
Yeah, I think this question on stickiness of spin-outs in the UK becomes very important. It's one thing to launch, but the other thing is for them to stick in the UK and grow in the UK. And there are 3 points I want to mention there very quickly. First is having the ecosystem, the infrastructure, the lab spaces, the office spaces, the lab spaces available to us regionally to support those. The second is having clusters. They thrive best when there are clusters of industries available in a particular region. And the third is around transport and interconnectivity at times, particularly in North, that sometimes could be a challenge. And I think it's not only about finances, also about other parts of the ecosystem that work together to deliver that stickiness of our spin-outs in the UK.
And the reason clusters are important, just to emphasise that, is that talent pool I've been mentioning a few times. That's the trick that works for Kendall Square in Silicon Valley. You've got a ready-made ecosystem of just really high-quality talent. That's why anchor institutions, you bring in big corporations, they bring staff we need to service our companies. Because not every academic can give up the day job and go and run a company, and neither are we very good at running companies. We need other types of talent to do that.
Can I bring in, so I'm going to bring in George and then Lauren and then Adam.
Thank you. It's on this point, actually. I think we all agree that the clusters in the UK are a great strength, and as Minister I was trying to encourage the system to think beyond Cambridge and indeed Oxford.
Yes.
I'm glad that on my cluster tour I got to all three of your universities. Can I ask, how good do you think we are as a country, as an ecosystem, globally, in telling the world about the strength of our clusters, and not just, yes, Oxford and Cambridge, but Warwick Robotics, Manchester Materials, Glasgow Satellites, Edinburgh Superfast Computing, Dundee Proteins, Sheffield. There's about 20 or 30 that are really world-class in bits of what they do. I struggled a bit with the UK, or I don't think like, in terms of innovation clusters, really, and I'm not sure that internationally we promote our clusters. Can I ask each of you what you think we could do, this government could do, to better encourage global investors to recognise our regional clusters and invest in them?
Well, I'll be a bit cheeky. Invest in them. A national, UK government invest in them and demonstrate that they are important in the context of UK competitiveness. For us in Scotland, and I think it's true for places in England as well, obviously with the mayoral authorities and so forth, city deals and regional deals are very, very important for the parts of the UK that are not as prosperous as the South East. And I think some city deals have done really, really well in terms of having innovation front and centre, and as a result of that, those cities have done well, or those regions. But some city deals have been quite low on innovation. So I think for me, what I would do in terms of what we do within the UK would be to recast city deals in a way where innovation has to be more prominent in all city deals. I think that would make a real difference. I think we could do with potentially revisiting the science and innovation audits that were done under Bayes about maybe 8 to 10 years ago, where there was a collection of objective evidence about the strengths of clusters. And I think that that's really important in terms of backing up the story as well. That led to the Strength in Places Fund via UKRI, but I think that to me worked for some places, and I think it would be something that could be done again. I know an old thing that works is still a good thing if it works, and I feel as if that's
may need new data. So that's a good point to take away, to look at how that is. And I just want to also capture the point about looking at the numbers of Chinese students at undergraduate and PhD level and how they're distributed across the country. I just want to make sure we're getting so much great information and suggestions from the panel, make sure we're capturing them. So, Professor Tiwari, would you?
The 2 points I want to mention. So, I think we have a world-class university sector, and that's very well known. But one of the things we also need to talk about more is our international competitiveness and leadership in translational innovation centers. So, if you look at Sheffield, for example, we have one of the best translational innovation centers, perhaps in the world. There's around £350 million of assets in there. We all know about AMRC, Advanced Manufacturing Research yes. Center. We have TURC, which is the Translational Energy Research Center, which does a lot of work around sustainable aviation fuels. We have GTIMC on gene therapy, Royce Translational Centers on materials. So there's a list of those. So I think these are the areas which could be quite magnets for international investment. And we have seen many examples of that, for example, in Sheffield region.
Yeah, so my specific question is really, how well is the UK promoting those around the world? In South Korea, in Japan, are people aware of that? Is there more we could be doing?
Yeah, I think we have seen very positive developments there. For example, the investments into Sheffield from Boeing has happened because of colleagues in the US aware of the translational assets, the AMRC that exists in the region. And I think that is something that we can promote more along with collaboration with the city councils and the mayoral combined authorities, for example.
There's a branding opportunity.
That's also a question for the FCDO that we should put to them, and for the science networks that you'll do. We need to move on. We've only got 10 more minutes on this with this fantastic panel. So I think Lauren would like to come in, and then Adam is going to bring Adam in.
Lovely, thank you. Mentioning kind of devolution and kind of the mayor sort of things, Dundee doesn't have a mayor.
No.
Yet 16% of its local economy is based on kind of sciences, life sciences. So how have you done it despite all of these obstacles? So
I think the answer to that lies very much with some of the leadership of the university over the last maybe 20 or 30 years. We've had a real commitment to invest in world-class science in health and life sciences. And that's been borne out by number one placings in the Research Excellence Framework for Biological Sciences in the last 2 refs, or equal with Institute for Cancer Research, to be honest. But anyway, and also very good reputation for the spin-out activity that we've done. I think that we've had a very strong focus on quality. I think that would be the first thing to say. And I think the point has been made a number of times that, you know, the really best opportunities that you get to do commercialisation come from really high quality research, if you can sustain it. Those are the ones with the highest value. I think the second thing I would say about Dundee's specific trajectory is that there has been a real commitment to investment in translational centres, centres where new research is translated into more commercialisable opportunity. So for instance, we've invested in the creation of the Drug Discovery Unit. It's the largest university-based drug discovery unit in the UK. It's like a kind of pharmaceutical industry drug discovery outfit, but it's in a university. We've got the Medical Research Council Protein Phosphorylation Unit is a 15 or 20-year investment from the Medical Research Council. Again, it's translational in nature. We've invested in those things with them, and as a result of that, we've got assets that are really strong when it comes to commercialisation. And I think that is what has driven the growth and numbers. It's also important to say, and I'm sure Irene would say the same, and everyone that's in this would, role models are super important. Role models on the academic side are super important. So, for example, Axis Shield Diagnostics was a start-up company. You may know it, I don't know, but it was a start-up company in Dundee, probably in the 1990s. But the fact that it was visible and it stayed on the city during its growth trajectory made a big, big difference. And our challenge at the moment, and the reason why we're building a innovation hub under the Tay Cities deal, our challenge at the moment is getting businesses that are formed in our city to stay and grow in our city for economic benefit. So Excientia, which Irene will know very, very well, formed in Dundee, now headquartered, well, now taken over by a US company, but headquartered in Oxford, formed in Dundee.
Okay. I think, you've got a very, very quick, very quick, and then we'll go on to...
During my PhD, I coupled with one of the diagnostic centres that was spun out from there, so that was really interesting. I just wanted to kind of bring in about the kind of the local job opportunities. So not everybody's been able to have the opportunity to go to universities. How has this helped people that maybe have not had that opportunity?
So again, making reference to the Tay Cities deal, and again enforcing how important the city deals are to cities like ours, which maybe have a research-intensive university but are basically poor, fairly unqualified hinterland of people. Part of the Tay Cities deal is a skills theme, and within that skills theme there's a skills for life sciences strand, and that involves the University of Dundee, University of St Andrews, Abertay University and the James Hutton Institute, which all have life sciences capability. And it's the intention is that people from our region will have the opportunity to, you know, perhaps aspire to be technicians or other roles within the company that don't require the same level of academic qualification.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to hand over to Adam to focus on regional role of universities in supporting regional growth.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you, everybody. It's been really informative this morning. So, I mean, we've touched several times already on the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge, London, and its great successes. It's been world-leading for centuries, frankly. But we've also talked extensively about innovation and the regions. And so the question I have is, how should the government be balancing making sure that the golden triangle remains internationally competitive with spreading innovation more evenly around the regions? And how can we harness all the great work that's being done in the Golden Triangle to support all of our universities and SMEs, etc., around the rest of the country to support regions like mine in the East Midlands?
We'll go through the panel. I think that's a really important question for everyone. So perhaps we'll start with Professor Tiwari.
Thank you. I think the key word here is to look for complementarities. It is not a zero-sum game here. We need to look for complementarities. And let me give you one specific example. There have been recently a number of conversations that we had in Sheffield with companies who are based and founded in Cambridge to look for their manufacturing scale-up operations in Sheffield. Now, that is quite a good example of complementarity, because here you're talking about a city which has got an expertise base in advanced manufacturing. It has got a space available which is more cost effective, for example, than what we may have in Cambridge. So provides quite an ideal opportunity for scale up of operations or scale up of spin-outs in the Sheffield city region. Now, that is the kind of conversations could happen at a more systemic level, at a more government level, where we can look for complementarities and encourage the work to be shared across the regions. So my head of commercialization sometimes uses the phrase headquartered in Cambridge and scaled up in Sheffield. So this is the kind of formula perhaps we need to look for in future.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that sort of thing has been happening all the time. So we have the same with Birmingham Innovation Park, that we're putting companies up there. We've actually put companies up in northeast regions as well. So that's been happening. It goes back to George's point. We haven't been good at describing and branding actually just how good a story this is. So the world knows that we have, people will bite your arms off for the higher education system you've got. What we haven't been good at, and that's our bad at our part too, but we've got to work together, is how do we get that message out around our expertise in this space and just our success story. I mean, we're licensing as many things as our big competitors in the USA. We're really good at this, but we don't tell the story. And we are doing lots of collaborations and partnerships. And again, the report said, let's all start working on common templates. Let's all learn from what's gone on in the Golden Triangle. Let's call it, let's make a triangle, with an arc and a driveway through Milton Keynes, so that we've actually got a Golden Triangle innovation cluster. We've got to do more of that, because the UK is a small country and we have to just work together. So quite a lot of us anyway have been planting companies around, but we need to do it more systematically. So we're creating partnerships, and many of the universities are, in order to share knowledge, create more consistency, but also move companies out and talent pool. It's a win-win, frankly. I can't build enough space for the companies that are coming out of Oxford. So this is great for us, and it's great for our people. And that takes talent to other parts, and it brings economy, because the job opportunities are huge. And with that comes not just, as you were mentioning, it's the apprenticeships that you can offer for local school kids as well to come and learn and train. The sequelae and the knock-on effects are just enormous. But if we could be sort of encouraged to do more, and that was more of a mission, we're absolutely up for that. We're here to serve, as I keep saying.
Just to clarify on that, though, Professor Tracey, because you seem to be suggesting, I think it's great that we're doing a great job of growing companies out of the Golden Triangle and into the rest of the country. But how can the rest of the country learn to better grow its spin-outs, I think is a key part of the question, from the success of the Golden Triangle?
That's the whole basis of the report, is to say, what have we learned from the Golden Triangle, which has just been at it for 20, 30 years? What are the deal terms we've learned to get to? And that's a big part of just learn from what we've got to, and that's what everybody's implementing. And then there's just that knowledge sharing amongst, the Russell Group and the UK Group. The people in the positions that my colleagues here are in connect together and learn together. So that is all happening. Yeah.
So let's hear from David.
So I've got two things to say, one of which follows on from what Irene said. Innovation infrastructure is incredibly important. Now, the South East has a lot of innovation infrastructure because the private sector is prepared to invest in innovation infrastructure in the South East of England and is blossoming out from there as well. Away from the South East of England, innovation infrastructure will not be invested by the private sector because of perceived lack of demand, and the public sector has to play an increasing role in creating innovation infrastructure the further away from that Golden Triangle you go. I feel the government has to be prepared to mandate one or more of its agencies to encourage more innovation infrastructure to be created regionally. So, for example, perhaps the British Business Bank could be asked to ring-fence a percentage of its available funds to work together with the private sector to create innovation infrastructure in other cities and regions across the UK. Because none of these things, in Scotland we have the Scottish National Investment Bank, it's the same sort of idea as the BBB, but the key thing about them is none of these machines work unless there's provision at every stage in the pipeline. And in a lot of the regions, there just isn't enough innovation infrastructure to even cope with what's coming out of the research bases at the moment, let alone what might be coming out of the research bases in future. And that tees me up for the final thing, which I was going to say, which was about volume of good stuff coming out of the research bases. It's great that the most recent budget confirmed that the UKRI Proof of Concept Fund pilot would proceed, because I think that that's something very, very important to have within the UK. We need a lot more of that. Non-dilutive funding at the end of at the point where research turns into the next thing, non-dilutive funding of a few 200k or whatever per project can make an absolutely huge difference to the number of high-quality spin-out or commercialisation opportunities that are created. It's proven that that works. However, it's always been difficult to get different politicians to agree that that's the right thing to do. They always expect the private sector will go down into that high-risk space, and it won't. So we need more proof of concept funding, whether it's UK national or devolved.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring Adam back quickly, and then I'm going to bring Tom in, and then we'll have to move on to our next panel, which will be just looking at innovation infrastructure. Adam.
Thanks, Chair. A quick question. You're building on everything that you've just said, really interesting points that you've just made there. Do you think, beyond the models that we've got in the UK, do you think there are models and examples internationally that you think we should be pulling in to do our best locally?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we sort of compare some of the things again in the report in terms of, what works well. I mean, I'll just go back to the sort of capital limit. It was very interesting with the pension reforms and sort of access to that capital bit. If you just make a very crude comparison between sort of where you would say you've got a very lively ecosystem that is now just self-sustaining, it's about having that supercluster, it's about having that sort of connectivity, the infrastructure is there, the private sector's there, you've got more permeability between the public and private sector. So one of the things we haven't flagged, but as another thing just touched lightly on the report, but speaks to this, the one thing we probably could learn, and we all, and I certainly in my role as Vice-Chancellor need to do, is to create a model of tenure track for our academics that's a lot more what I call permeable. So that there's ease of porosity between the public and private sector. So that now we've got to work out how to backfill all the teaching and all the other stuff you've got to do to run the university, but we have got to let the next generation coming through of academics be able to either have a hybrid existence, so they're 25% in a company, 70% in, they might go out for 5 years and then come back in. We've just got to allow that freedom between the public and private sector, and that's for us to sort out, and that's probably the bit that's the slight elephant in the room, because that's quite a big cultural change within the university sector. We've got to work out how to backfill. We did suggest that the government should help us with that, with the teaching backfill. But I would say in the US, you've got different models for that. You're basically funded for 75%, and then you can do what you want for the other 25% of your tenure track role. So that's something I'm looking at actively, and that would be sort of one thing I would highlight that we could learn.
Professor Tiwari?
Yeah, I think we need to also look at the cost base for our early spin-out companies that are coming out, and how do we preserve those and allow them to grow. So one of the things that came up in our South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority visit to Pittsburgh, that was led by Mayor Oliver Capard, was the presence of regional labs at Pittsburgh that offer look at cost-effective solutions for scale up to spin-out organizations. So I think that's another formula we need to look at. How do we reduce the cost base for companies who are in their early days?
That's a question we'll put to the catapults next. Tom, did you want to jump in just very briefly?
Yeah. Effectively, obviously it's a great thing, and we all want to see more regional growth supported by the sector. I'm just wondering what sort of social considerations are given to the fact that we know that in places like Cambridge, Oxford, and particularly even if you look at places like Harrogate, where we've got a number of, the cost of living can be massively increased. So I'm just wondering what considerations given to that as part of it, and how we make sure that when we are seeing regional growth from the sector, that it's done in a way which is supported, and that those opportunities, touching on what Lauren said, are actually given to local people rather than people just moving into the area because we've not upskilled the workforce there.
It's a fantastic point, and we refer to it in Oxford as inclusive innovation. We have got to grow well, and part of the reason that you have challenges with growing and the idea of growth is because, frankly, in Britain, we haven't grown well. We've done things without thinking about what's the impact on traffic, schools, access to GP services. If we can prove with our innovation and our growth agenda that we can do it well and with sensitivity that's inclusive with the local people, it's bringing absolute direct tangible benefits and we resolve some of the infrastructure problems, then we'll change the cultural perception of growth equals bad, which is a bit of a roadblock culture, I'd say, in Britain. And I think we're all quite mindful of that. So we refer to it as inclusive innovation in Oxford. That's our sort of way of thinking about it. We haven't got it perfect, but we're working really hard with our local city and county councillors in terms of how do we do that. So I have an innovation council that brings together all those, and we're thinking very hard about how to make sure that we grow well when we do that. Because if you do look at some of the criticisms, I'd say, of what's happened, say, in the US, is it's a real problem. It's actually a real problem for the students because they're spinning out so many companies, they're not finishing their degrees, or they're having challenges. And that's a problem too, because you've got to train the next generation pipeline of scientists. So there's a balance to be struck between too much is really bad because you're not sort of training people. And then you put such pressure on the local that nobody can afford to live there as a postdoc. So you have a crisis of recruiting postdocs, and they can't afford to live in the Bay Area. So we've got to watch what's not worked in the American model and make sure we don't make the same mistakes here. And it does come down to inclusive growth.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks very much to the panel. I'm afraid we have to move on to our next. We've overrun, but it's been very, very interesting in your contributions from, if you like, across the UK, Scotland, Dundee, and Oxford. Have given us a lot of insight into the role of universities in driving regional growth. So thank you. And if you'd like to, we've cut it short a little, if you'd like to submit further written evidence, I think we'd always be prepared to read it. So thank you very much. Okay. Order. Order, and welcome our second panel for this morning's evidence session on growth, innovation, and the regions. And now this panel we will be speaking with specifically looking at regional innovation, catapults and clusters, and devolution and innovation. Now I'm going to ask each of you, starting, and this time I'll start on my right with Mike Wright, to just introduce yourselves and say where you are, and then I'll open it to the panel to the committee for questions. So, Mr. Wright.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Mike Wright. I am the independent chair of the West Midlands Innovation Board, a board that was set up 5 years ago. The membership is businesses and the universities in the region. So we have a joint discussion, meetings, developing strategies for the innovation ecosystem in the West Midlands. It's a very large geographical area. We have a population of nearly 5 million people. The combined authority stretches from Wolverhampton in the northwest down to Coventry in the southeast through Birmingham, and it consists of 7 local authorities, so it's a sizable piece of geography. We have 6 universities in that combined authority region, 2 of which are Russell Group, and the others are very productive and successful in their areas as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Morning, well, almost afternoon. Thanks to the committee for the opportunity to represent, I guess, the Greater Manchester voice is with multiple hats today. My background, unlike the previous panel, I'm not an academic. I'm an entrepreneur by trade, but joined the university 12 months ago to lead on a process called the Regional Innovation Review, which very pertinent to today, recognised the role of the university in driving the growth, the largest innovation asset in our city region, and asking ourselves the question, what could we do and should we do to drive economic growth and maximise the innovation potential of our region. That's resulted kind of almost 12 months later in the creation of a new unit called Unit M that is there with a mandate to unlock the full potential of our region's innovation economy. So I now lead that unit. I also chair Greater Manchester's Business Board and work closely with Dundee as Mayor and our city leadership. So great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. McHugh.
Hi, my name is Martin McHugh. I'm the Chief Executive of the Compound Semiconductor Applications Catapult, based in the heart of the Compound Semiconductor Cluster in South Wales. We're one of 9 catapults in the Catapult network that basically its purpose is to help companies take the deep tech research from universities and actually commercialise it.
Fantastic, great. So we have South Wales, Manchester and the Midlands represented here, which is a good compliment to our previous evidence panel. I'm going to ask Emily to kick us off and then bring in Adam and George, and please let me know if you'd like to come in.
So I've got a couple of questions about catapults and their role in driving growth and innovation in the UK. First of all, just a really simple one, but maybe not that simple. So 9 catapults, that's been pretty stable for a long time. The areas have been stable for a long time. Have we identified the right areas? Is there any areas that we are missing within that catapult network? And should we be pushing on additional catapults?
I think that's a question for the whole panel. Let me start with Martin, if I can call you back.
Thank you very much indeed. Very good question. So if we go back to about 2011, Herman House's original report did actually recommend that there should be far more catapults than we currently have. The catapult program, as you point out, has actually been fairly stable since the inauguration of our catapult around about 2018. The catapult network itself believes there should be expansion into areas of to fix what the catapults were originally for, which is to fix market failures. A good example of the network is it's self-formed the Hydrogen Innovation Initiative, HII, and I think that's a good example of the Catapult network actually recognising one particular gap and actually trying to do something to fix that. I think there are 2 ways we can actually address that question, is actually identify where there are more catapults needed, not just to put catapults in for the sake of putting catapults in, but also I think identify where the existing catapults could do more in the regions. An example would be catapults are broadly split into 3 types of catapults. There's the sort of what we call capital intensive, like offshore renewable or high value manufacturing. There are what you call systems catapults, which is like energy system, DigiCat and connected places. And then you have application catapults like ourselves, TAPS, and then you've got medicine discovery and cell and gene therapy. So you have, I think, the right mix of catapults in terms of the either national or embedded in their cluster. My recommendation would be that we do need to review where more are needed and where the existing ones could actually do more within multiple clusters. So if you look at the Compound Semiconductor Catapult, it's actually based in Newport, which has got a recognised cluster. Our catapult actually recognises there are strong clusters around the UK, and I'm rather hoping Mr. Freeman asked me the same question that he asked the other people about national presence and everything else, because I think there's something there to answer as well. Does that That help?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
leads on very well to my next questions, but just focusing particularly on areas that we are missing catapults in. Do you have any suggestions on areas that would be good to have catapults in, either of you?
I'll add just very briefly, because I'm sat next to a catapult expert, but just to flag, and I think anybody who knows my colleague, Professor Richard Jones, will have possibly had this discussion, a fairly lively discussion with him, but, we've got, data that demonstrates the absence of a catapult in Greater Manchester and the impact that's had on our kind of regional economy and the R&D spend. I think that argument's fairly well documented. We've had that conversation in a very lively and robust and productive way with Innovate colleagues and UKRI
Is that
colleagues.
an absence of any catapult or a particular catapult?
Well, so I guess, we have particular strengths in advanced manufacturing and materials, but, what the data shows you is when there isn't catapult presence, there's obviously an impact on R&D spend in the locality, and there are kind of ripples that flow from that. So I think that's also not to say that just because there is an absence, that a role is just to plant one. I think the other thing we've also had some really robust dialogues and I think are worth exploring are the notion of what a catapult is, and actually thinking in a more networked, federated way, exactly as you've described, to fill gaps that are needed and to plug the market, as opposed to catapults for the sake of catapults.
Well, we heard from our last panel that there was a need to bridge the gap from proof of concept to growth, to scale up, if you like, and that is what catapults are designed exactly to do, in my understanding. So I suppose one of the questions is how successfully they are doing that, which is what
it's
is
written right here. No, yes. Absolutely, I agree. Having been the special advisor who was there when we created Catapults in Innovate UK, or as it was known then, the Technology Strategy Board, there was specific ambitions for it. So I had two questions that are linked. So how good have catapults been in reinforcing and growing clusters in the UK? And the second one, what has been and what should be their role in addressing the talent pool and access to capital challenges for company growth here in the UK?
Right, I'll start with, we asked Mike.
Yeah, thanks. Going back slightly very quickly to the earlier question, I think the obvious one is new technologies, enabling technologies like AI. I mean, it's an easy suggestion. It's a very complicated answer, but the real world futured is that AI is going to be an enabler for all sectors and all capabilities. But having said that, certainly from the West Midlands perspective, as was indicated earlier, we leverage 3 or 4 catapult. Obviously, the high value manufacturing catapult we've got 2 operations and the headquarters in the region. We did actually convene with Innovate UK and ourselves at our initiative a discussion with catapults about how we could leverage, not instead of, but more local activity and benefit locally. And that was a very productive session and came out with a number of tactical suggestions, but nonetheless worthwhile. To your point, I think the real issue is how we focus on this translational piece in terms of startup and funding for startups and scale up. That is a very complicated issue to address, and certainly the Innovation Board doesn't get into the detail of that. Our job is to facilitate an ecosystem that businesses and universities and others can take advantage of. And I think the experience thus far is that the catapults, particularly the high value manufacturing one for us, has been very beneficial in delivering startups, but very interestingly, there's a lot of translational activity that's happened. So the strategy for the region is not to just base our innovation capability on our traditional advanced manufacturing, advanced engineering capabilities, but go into medic tech, go into, excuse me, create tech, go into clean tech. And a lot of the capabilities that have come out of the high-value manufacturing catapults are translational to give us a quick start in those areas as well. So I think it's not just a focused area, it's a broader application of the outputs of the catapults. And I would argue, if you are going to add, please don't mess with the current successful base, because there is a danger in this country where everything is new, and some of them are working very, very successfully.
How do you measure success?
Which ones are?
You just said they're working very successfully.
It's everything from local employment. I mean, there's nearly 2,000 people employed in the catapults in our region now. The technology outputs, and there are a myriad of activities that have come out of it.
So there's a set of key performance indicators by which this committee could measure.
But the most important thing is innovation links into the combined authorities' challenges for boosting the local economy. So there's an economic impact as well.
Absolutely, great. Shall we? Well, let's hear quick. Have you got quick questions, George and Kit, to bring in now as the rest of the panel answer? Just quick questions.
Well, there are two questions.
Okay. Well, we'll go on. We'll hear from on the questions then, Elizabeth. From Lou.
Right. I'll perhaps just build on what Mike said with a couple of points. I think there is a really interesting question as of yesterday around AI. And when we think about the ambition now to have regional capabilities and regional presence and where that fits with catapults, and I think also recognising AI as a horizontal. So actually what we're increasingly finding in a multidisciplinary innovation world, we're thinking about materials plus AI, we're thinking about health innovation, we're thinking about different vertical strengths. So I think that there's a kind of knot to unpick there really quite urgently. I'm hoping we're going to talk about innovation accelerators as a different model at some point, and so I'll perhaps leave that for now. I think the question around access to capital challenges, in my experience and my kind of background as an entrepreneur, that the equation is relatively simple in that if we have a quality and a calibre of deal flow, capital is fairly good at finding the quality and the capital of deal flow. So I think actually maximising the role of catapults wherever they be and whatever they're concentrated on stimulating not just the volume but the investor readiness and the calibre of our local, regional, early stage, high potential businesses will help us a huge amount with that challenge.
Thank you. Martin?
I was just going to add that that the catapults actually have to operate at multiple levels. So we obviously have a national mandate. We have a regional presence, and what we've discovered in our catapult is that you have to understand the strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities and threats of the region you're supporting and working and you're anchored in, and the spill effects of that. But you also have to understand and appreciate the regional differences of other regions. So our catapult is, I'll speak from my catapult because I understand it. So there are 3 or 4 clusters within the UK of expertise within our field. We happen to be based in Newport, but there are, there's a strong cluster in Scotland, a strong cluster in the northeast, and there's an emerging cluster in the southwest with some elements of activity in Northern Ireland. And the one thing we've discovered is that each of those regions, whilst they actually assign themselves as creditworthy and compound semiconductors, they have a particular strength. In your region would be class itself as satellite. Scotland would be more of sort of energy, and Bristol is more in sort of photonics, and South Wales is more materials. So the catapult actually has to understand strengths and weaknesses within those regions. The other thing I've learned in the 5 years I've been in the job, you can't trample into the region and tell them what to do. They need to understand themselves what you need to support them. And then I think the real power for the catapult then is how it actually knits those various regions within the UK to create the UK value train, which I think then answers the question that you were trying to ask earlier on. And I think that's the bit that's missing at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks. Fantastic question, Emily. And I think we should be writing perhaps to the Secretary of State to ask how the two new organisations he's creating around AI engage or fit in with the Catapult network. I just want to say also, Lou, if I may call you, I'm interested in your comment that Capital does find quality projects, and I think that's when we're looking at access to capital, that's something that the committee should consider the evidence for, because I do also know entrepreneurs across the countries who are not convinced that capital is finding all the best projects. But thank you very much for those answers. They're very, very interesting. I think I'm going to go to Adam.
Just to qualify just on that point, I think that's about critical mass. So I think what you often find is entrepreneurs have individual stories where they're slightly alone in how exceptional it might be, but I think creating critical mass in regions makes that just easier to find on a map.
Okay, that's fine. Great. We're going to go to Adam, and then we're going to go to George.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, everybody. We touched a little bit on this earlier, that the catapults as a concept were created to take those kind of low technology readiness level ideas and products and catapult them essentially up to the higher level technology readiness levels. I've heard that referred to as the valley of death, where good ideas used to go to die. How do you feel that the model, without pointing at individual catapults or not, how do you feel that the whole catapult model is performing in bridging that valley of death?
Quite happy to answer that, sorry.
You looked into answer
and
that?
not from a sort of self-interest point of view. So it's a really good question. So catapults really are the custodians of translational research from the deep tech through to commercialization. We have to maintain that. The Catapult network itself puts a lot into being a trusted neutral convener in the first place that can be trusted with that. The translational research is an interesting challenge because in its digital format, academia would typically be seen to be 1 to 3 if everybody understands the TRL side of it. Catapults would typically be 4 to 6, and then industry would be 7, 8, and 9. And one of the things the Catapult network does have a concern in is that if that's a handshake from one entity to the other and then to the other, you are relying on a sort of digital handshake. So you find that the universities will kind of stretch into 4 and the catapults will stretch into 3. It's a natural thing. So we see it as a key measure within our catapult, and we actually measure across all the projects that we're doing what the TRL effect is of our particular catapult. I know the others do it. So typically over the course of a 2 to 3 year collaborative research project, we'll see a TRL level lift by about two places. So it's, we can see where we're moving that, but to Lou's point, you need scale to really, and I think the system needs to be better joined up.
Yeah. Do you think though the current model is effective in doing that job?
Yes, it is. I think there's always room for improvement. I think there's always, for me, for our catapult, it's not so much about improving that particular side, but it's rolling it out into a wider scale across the UK. I've got people in the Great Southwest down in Plymouth, to the point you said that, they're quite anxious they don't have an Innovate UK or a Catapult asset in the region, and they feel that not having that asset doesn't naturally make them a go-to place for international investors. In our Catapult, and like all the other catapults, you're constantly hosting international visitors, and that, to me, that's the gap appears in, can we get something similar and appropriate in other regions, and can we get the existing network to sort of broaden out as well, or certainly give us the opportunity to broaden. Does that answer you?
Yes, great.
That's an interesting sort of consequence, that if there's a catapult in an area, in a subject matter, then if you're a company interested in that subject matter and you don't have a catapult in your region, then you're at a disadvantage. I think Lou, you wanted to come in briefly.
Really briefly to that point to say, I guess, asterisk, other models are available, and I think, we also shouldn't discount, we have an organisation called the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre, which she is very familiar with, which is, I think, would openly describe itself as Catapult-like, but actually what it's doing is, it's running programmes like the Bridging the Gap programme, that until recently was EU funded, and that spiders out into the existing business network at a really granular level, and works with organisations that might not consider themselves to be innovation businesses and might not recognise that materials innovation or that universities even have a relevance to their future success and their future opportunity. And I think we've seen huge success with that hyper-local activity that actually now is yielding not spin-outs but scale-ups that are taking the assets of the university and applying them to local industry in a really different way.
Great.
I think, if I can add 2 points. One is partnerships are very important here. Partnerships with business, partnerships with... we've been very successful through the Warwick Manufacturing Group to get Plug and Play to invest in the region, and they are experts at sorting out the valley of death question that you asked. But there are complementary networks. As Lou said, we've got a very successful Tech West Midlands organisation, which is privately funded. But that is a network that enables people to talk with each other, do collaborations, do partnerships, to actually get through the hurdles that you're identifying. The problem with the Valley of Death is that it's a known known, and innovation is a lot about unknown knowns. And what you need is a very strong ecosystem that isn't a one-stop shop, that can leverage the ecosystem depending on the technology you're trying to innovate on. Or don't forget, process innovation is very important, because the way we do things needs to be innovated as well. So it's not a one-stop shop. You need to find a way of answering each individual challenge.
Thank you very much. George, you've been intimately involved in catapults and clusters in your time as Minister. I mean, you'd like to come in here.
Thanks, Gian. Thanks for coming in. I think this is a really key conversation as the new government looks to harness S&T for economic growth. There's a tension here, isn't there, between sector and place. 14 years I've lived it. In the coalition, we went big on sectors, and the catapults were framed around building on UK academic deep science and technology expertise and linking with industry. And then under Theresa May, we went stronger on place, and I think that tension runs through it. I wanted to ask 3 linked questions on that. As we try to unlock a much bigger R&D economy across the whole country, what are the metrics that this government should be judging the catapults on? My instinct is very strongly industry engagement, and some of them, clearly cell and gene therapy, satellite, advanced manufacturing, have really pulled in a lot of industry work. So what do you think is the metric? And clearly, government needs to decide, because some of them are doing, they're all a bit different, and there are groups of them. Secondly, what is their place role? Because there are some places where there isn't a catapult and they're flying. And Cambridge doesn't have a catapult. It is a catapult. The catapults are designed to try and, in a way, recreate what has happened at the heart of that cluster. But in, say, Glasgow, satellite manufacturing catapult has been completely instrumental to driving the turnaround, the renaissance in Glasgow. So I'm interested, secondly, in how you think government should think of them in place. Does Manchester's an amazing innovation ecosystem. Does it need a catapult, or does it need the innovation accelerator that I was delighted to set up? And the third question is private sector competition. Because as the government looks rightly to invest massively in bioengineering, in data centres, we clearly want to be hauling in private money. But in some areas, like the CPI, they're a brilliant institute, but there are complaints that its cost base drives out private sector competition. So I'm interested in metrics, place, and how you get the balance right with the private sector, so we don't build expensive public infrastructure that the private sector can never match or work with.
Great. Okay, that's a question for each member of the panel. Let's start with Martin.
Thank you very much. Three very good questions that actually probably characterise my daily work in life, actually. So metrics, I think I would advocate simple logic models that are appropriate for the industry. So the logic model or the impact model, I think, would be different for our Catapult, for maybe a systems Catapult that's more sort of UK focused than for a capital intensive Catapult to an applications Catapult. So we drive our applications Catapult is meant to create market pull. So we're trying to create the market for the supply chain, and for that we need to help companies design new products. That's why we're particularly interested in TRL level. We're particularly interested in keeping our model fairly simple, and it's driven by creation of jobs and the investment that SMEs can actually attract. We've just really simplified it down so we can track it, and what we're able to do is take that back to 5 key barriers that SMEs actually face in trying to introduce new products and commercialise their technology. We've got those 5 barriers clearly understood. We've got 5 clear interventions that we use the core grant for, and then what we do then is track the outputs and then translate those into our actual outcomes then as well. And so typically we would look to, so I can tell you now that we've helped small businesses attract close to £600 million worth of private investment. We know that's about half as much again as the companies that we don't work with, as an example. So that's on the metrics question. I think that, keep it simple. And in terms of the regions, I would drive the regions to have appropriate set of impact model or logic model that actually clearly drives their thinking. In terms of place, I think it's a really good question. One of the challenges we faced, and I know SatApps have faced this as well, that they're based in the cluster, so satellite applications are in Harwell, but actually there's lots of satellite activity around the UK. We found the same, and you're constantly balancing the needs of a local cluster that thinks you're there to serve them when actually you're there to serve the UK. And that's why we were very keen to do regional expansion, not necessarily to replicate the infrastructure, but really to put the sort of coalface activity into the regions. So the place I totally agree with, and in terms of the private sector competition, that's a really good question. The difficulty is the catapults are mandated to attract private income as part of their thirds model. We got a very simple saying in our catapult, and it's not to demean anything, but if you can buy it on eBay and Amazon, we shouldn't be selling it. So, we have to provide services that are not freely available in the open market, and that's always a challenge. So, one of the questions I often face is, you're providing services with government-backed money, you're competing against some private sort of R&D concerns, so you're constantly balancing that ability to make those services accessible to SMEs, whilst not actually falling foul of subsidy law.
Right, okay. A lot of complexity there, but I think part of George's question was to try and simplify out understanding what the metrics are. And
metrics, I think, need to be kept simple.
Yes, but there seems to be quite a lot of complexity in keeping them simple.
Well, that's the nature of the catapult role. So in terms of metrics, ours are very simple. I've kept them that way. In terms of place, I think we need to be in the place to understand what local regions and clusters can actually, where they can benefit from us. And in terms of the competition, then you have to be very aware that if you're providing commercial services as you're mandated under the model, that you're not competing with the very companies you're meant to be helping.
Right, great.
That's the nature of the role, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Thank you.
A quick answer on your questions, George. I think on measures, I mean, really simply for me, I think everything should now be measured on what the UK's large growth challenges are, which are translation and adoption, scale-up volume and calibre, and keeping our scale-ups in the UK. So, you know, creating the supply chains, the communities, the specialist networks that mean that businesses don't want to leave. And critically, I think, taking what we've learned from the last 20 to 30 years of growth, as was discussed on the previous panel, inclusion. So I think we do need to start to measure who benefits from innovation economies, and I think it needs to be somebody different than has benefited from the last 20 to 30 years. That comes with a caveat. That's very difficult to measure, but I think we should start. I think in terms of the place-based role, we need to recognise the maturity of different ecosystems and places, and catapults can play a really important part in stimulating that and putting a flag of confidence in the ground. I'm hoping we might have opportunity to talk about partnerships between places as well, which is a particular passion and opportunity. And then in terms of where government capital should be focused versus markets, I think really simply government capital should focus on doing what the markets won't. So where it can de-risk, where it can stimulate, where it can stray, where markets won't. And then we should focus our storytelling and our engagement and etc. exactly to the points discussed earlier on bringing in capital and giving capital the confidence to invest in the UK.
Right. Yes, just to build on a couple of things that have been said on the metrics. The only thing I'd add is different technologies and capabilities have different lead times in terms of how you measure the benefits. So, for example, if you're in the high engineering, advanced manufacturing world, turning that into a sustainable long-term proposition probably takes a little longer than other areas. But the long-term benefits are probably very material. Place is interesting. We actually we did a trawl of the Catapult network and realised that we probably missed the benefit of one Catapult, the Connected Places. So in the Innovation Accelerator, we deliberately sought out to introduce a new Catapult into the region to help some of the challenges that we thought we had in that world. So I think it's a two-way thing. And I know a lot of companies in the West Midlands know that if they're looking for a particular piece of help, will reach out. So, advanced materials, there's quite a lot of bilateral work that goes on with Sheffield that you heard about earlier, and down in Bristol. So I think the onus is as much on the place to reach out to the national network as it is to everybody wants their own sort of catapult cluster in the region. Private sector, I've really got nothing to add. I mean, at the end of the day, if you think internationally about our capability, it is the private sector piece, and that the private sector investment at the end of the day is going to determine whether you've got a successful, long-standing model or not. Our competitors, and I don't mean within the UK, our competitors around the world tend to use regional or national government funds to prime the early piece, and then have enabling tools to make sure that those businesses, when they've scaled up, are successful. But I agree with Lou, sticky scale-up is probably, and you heard it in the previous panel, is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have in terms of private and public sector investment.
Thank you. Now let's move on. Thanks very much, George. Let's move on to Steve, who has some questions on devolution and innovation.
Great, thank you. I think at least two of our panel here are covered by mayoral devolution in particular. And I think before we go on to the English devolution white paper that's published Christmas, it'd be great to hear from you all about how you perceive sort of mayoral devolution in particular as being either beneficial or not, or could be doing better to help you all to deliver more innovation in your areas.
Happy to start. I mean, we, as you're aware, the West Midlands was awarded a trailblazer devolution status a couple of years ago. But of course, the scope of that did not include innovation or R&D, so we're still operating in that space against the national model. Having said that, and we keep saying we'll talk about the innovation accelerators, but I think the innovation accelerator has been a game changer in terms of boosting our confidence that we actually probably could influence and guide innovation, not instead of, but as an and against our plans in terms of growing the local economy, and in particular addressing some of the more challenging areas that we have in the region. We're a bit of a microcosm of the UK. We've got some very successful parts of the West Midlands, but we've also got some very challenging areas. So we believe that there are opportunities to consolidate some of the pilot work we've been doing with Innovate UK on the Plan for Action, which has given us the opportunity to develop a sort of bilateral approach to the particular challenges and particularly the opportunities for the region, but also to share those benefits across the country so we can, and if I may say, I think one of the things we've learned is we can work quicker and faster. The previous speakers talked about speed, but because of the setup, we can actually move faster. So those would be my... And sorry, I must mention one thing without embarrassing George, but the innovation mapping model tool that is now, it gives you a lot more data about where the hotspots of innovation are within our region, but also nationally, which can either forge partnerships or stop you duplicating. There's a lot of maturity in terms of the information that's out there.
Can I just to make a point there that one of the tensions is academic data versus industry. I knew there was a thing called the Marine Tech Corridor in the South Coast, but UKRI didn't recognise it because it's not come out of UKRI. It's defence industry, shipping, so these clusters aren't all academic.
Well, they shouldn't be, should they?
They shouldn't be, and the data sets need to reflect.
And to my earlier point, I think, it's a personal view, and it will upset a lot of statisticians, but we've got to stop thinking in sectors, because businesses don't think in sectors. Given all the crises of the last 10, 20, they want to have more resilience, so they're looking outside of traditional sectors. So, traditional sector approach to actually develop a model that actually gives them more long-term sustainable resilience.
Thanks, and we will take that forward. I'm just going to ask Lou briefly to respond. The committee did visit Liverpool and spoke to Steve Rotherham about the Liverpool innovation deal. Now, I'm not sure whether they had innovation as part of their deal, but I wondered how the work in Manchester and in Liverpool, how you would compare yourself, if it's not too controversial a way of putting it.
Yeah, so I think we would... I mean, there's lots of comparables in terms of some of our kind of sector capabilities, so strong creative industry roots, biochemicals, lots of industrial capabilities where there's parallel. There's obviously lots of political alignment, existing industry collaborations, and the physical geography means that largely our labour markets don't really recognise those boundaries, so there's more fluidity than a little bit to George's point about the maps. You don't always see those things on a map, but actually, we operate as a kind of northwest region on many levels. We don't have devolved power around innovation either, and I think there's a really interesting point around what devolution gives us, and we've seen this a little bit through the innovation accelerators. And the work as largely one of the tensions of government involvement in innovation and government support is the innovation industry, and the innovation process requires agility and flexibility and being able to pivot, and that's not always aligned with, for understandable reasons, government process and government procedure. So actually, devolved processes, single settlements, some of those regional levers at a more localised level helps with some of that, and also helps us to think in a whole system way. So we have an organisation called Innovation Greater Manchester, which is our convening point for the triple helix for our universities, for industry and for local government. And what that gives us is a way not just to think about the innovation sector and growth, but to think about what comes alongside that, so skills, transport, housing, all of those other things that are needed to make that work and need to be considerations. That said, I think one of the things we learned through the Innovation Accelerator is the ideal is a blend, because there are capabilities and expertise and macro perspectives that exist at a national level that you want to be able to blend with the perspective and the hyper-local knowledge that you have of your people and your economy and your challenges at a regional level. So that ability to be able to continue to work in collaboration, and I think actually through the white paper, the strength and commitment of UKRI to work with the mayoral strategic authorities will be really critical and definitely was a kind of key positive takeout of our Innovation Accelerator experience.
Thank you. That's okay. I'm going to bring Alison in and then Kit. If that's okay.
I'd just like to ask two questions. One comes back to place, but the second one is to allow you to expand upon the accelerator. So I did want to give you that opportunity. My constituency sits in Stoke-on-Trent and into North Staffordshire, so between Birmingham and Manchester. So my question really relates to those tensions between the innovations and success seen within the major cities and how that can be rolled out into the wider regions and the urban and non-urban areas as well, because obviously the caucus report did identify that there was tensions between the major cities and the wider region. So I'd like to sort of ask that question first about how we could roll out the benefit throughout the region.
So would you ask a second question at the same time?
Because I will do. Well, it's very simply, it was just how successful were the Innovation Accelerator pilots in both in Greater Manchester and West Midlands, and what challenges did these pilots encounter, and how could we address these for broader rollout?
Great. We'll go to Lou first this time.
Right, so taking the first question, I mean, we're actually through with the Unit M work thinking a lot about this question, because I think it comes back to the inclusion point around who benefits. And, you know, there's undeniable evidence about the role of major cities and major conurbations to be growth drivers. We actually see a really important role for the universities in that. So if I take, not your territory, but I think, you know, a similar challenge of some of our work in the Greater Manchester region, the university's been working incredibly closely with a project called Atom Valley, which is a major innovation project, a very long-term innovation project that spans the Mayoral Development Corporation of Rochdale, Oldham, Bury, one of the most deprived parts of the Northwest. And actually looking at that and the role of a university and the kind of innovation that comes out of our institution and how we can create presence and work with local skills providers to drive jobs and opportunity for local population, but also working really collaboratively with the existing business base. So actually the SEAMS programme, which was one of our Innovation Accelerator programmes, was a bit of a forebearer to that. And that was one of the great things, was having almost pilot type projects where we can begin that learning curve and we can gather insights that then inform the larger scale and the larger longer term investment. So I think actually universities have a really important part to play in that. Skills is an incredibly important part of that, and not just in a university degree sense at all tiers, and particularly a technical skills agenda. And, you know, really crudely transport. I mean, one of the things that we've learned in Greater Manchester is you've got to connect the people to the opportunities to remove that barrier. And we've tested all sorts of initiatives, as you may have seen, around affordability, free travel and free bus travel for our young people. So, you know, we kind of talk about them, the young people of our city region being able to see the skyscrapers, but removing the barriers in order to get to those jobs and those opportunities. But I think that the answer is you have to work really hard at it. It doesn't happen by a natural trickle down, and wiring the ecosystem and measuring success in a way that recognises the importance of that, we think is critical.
I just echo what Lou said. I mean, the adjacent local authorities are non-constituent members of the combined authority, so they're actively engaged in all the work that we do at a combined authority level. And the University of West Midlands Association embraces the adjacent universities as well. So Keele, for example, is a very active member. The opportunities, I think, and it was touched on in the earlier session, I mean, we've talked about it a couple of times, but the scale-up challenge is probably the biggest challenge that we've got as a country and as a region. And I think the adjacent geographies can play a really important role in that. It's not Staffordshire, but if you look at Warwickshire and how it has benefited and developed its own, it's very big on gaming. I think it's a fifth of the gaming industry in the UK. It's built up a lot of high value add supply chain support into the West Midlands ecosystem. On the other end of the geography, agri-tech in Shropshire is a really interesting opportunity which the Catapults are working on as well. So I think it's a really important question. It's something that we're very conscious of.
I'm going to bring in Lauren very briefly on this particular issue.
We're
going to go to Kit and then Lauren and then
the Innovation Accelerator benefits.
Very, very quickly.
Yeah.
One
It's been it's a pilot program, very low scale in terms of money, but what it has, I think, taught both of us that we have got the capability, with assurance from national, IUK, to actually deliver some very, very exciting projects. And all 5 in our region have exceeded their initial outcome. Timescale, a 2-year innovation accelerator project, with the greatest respect, is too short. And I'm delighted that the government have extended it for 1 year, but if you'd known it was 3 years to start with, you would have had an even better outcome.
We visited the Digital Catapult here in London, and I have to tell you, it was a pretty shocking visit, right, from my point of view. Glittering office, completely empty, obviously costing an absolute fortune, and they asked us for more money. It struck me then that they, in particular, were effectively a very expensive way of funneling government subsidy to business. It's a kind of flashy administration arm. Right, and when you look at all the catapult exercises and all the rest of it, none of it is detectable in national growth figures. Right, none of it. Right, our growth has been sluggish now for a decade. We can't tell. And as you pointed out, there are cities that are existing perfectly happily and successfully without them. So it made me wonder whether there's a different way, a better way. I mean, one of the things that everybody tells us is about the difficulty of accessing mid-level capital. If we took all that money and made it much more tax efficient for people to put mid-level capital into innovative UK businesses, would we have a bigger impact?
Well, that's...
turkey's voted for Christmas, right? But it just... am I wrong? It just felt to me like the Digital Catapult in particular was just an expensive funnel for government money.
Okay, Kit, that's a provocative and interesting perspective. I'm going to ask Lauren to ask her question and put both questions to the panel. So, revolutionising or completely changing the infrastructure of investment into innovation. Suggesting proposal from Kit and Lauren. What was your?
My question, I think, just was to pick up on what we've been talking about, inclusive growth. So how are we measuring, and what are the correct metrics, if we need to use metrics, to measure the local impact, and that we're not just moving people out, we are actually taking people with us.
Okay, so these are 2 good points on which to finish. How do we measure the local impact? And have we been getting it wrong all this time? And we need to actually just, make all the funding that we have for... Kit, was your point? All the funding that is available for innovation to make it available as a pot for investment. I'll take the views, and this time, so briefly, as we're running out of time, I'll ask Martin, Mike, and then Lou.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a good question. I think in terms of the total pot, I'd take it back one step and actually put it back to the panel. I've been in the role 5 years, and I think roughly every 18 months the catapults have been subjected to a review. There's the original Ernst & Young and the Bays and the House of Lords, and there's other reviews going on. As a result of those reviews, there have been multiple reports and to my knowledge and to what I've been told by Innovate UK, I am not aware of any failing catapults.
Failing catapults? Right.
Any failing catapults. Right? If there's a failing catapult, that's an issue for Innovate UK and the government, but when you look at the number of reviews that have been held with catapults and the reports that have been written, right?
Define failure.
Yeah. I'm going to say, hence my question about metrics.
I think that's what you need to define. You're telling me that there's a particular catapult failing in that sense. We're not aware of.
No, I don't think they're necessarily failing. They're doing broadly what they were set up to do, which is to funnel government subsidy to business. I just find it a rather expensive way to do it.
They were set up. Then you need to understand the different types of catapults. So they're more of a systems type of catapult. They're not particularly place-based. They're placed all around the UK. Right. They're there to
I think you have answered Kit's sort of general point, and it should be said that it wasn't the view of it wasn't the official view of the committee.
Oh no. Right. It's been my own view.
It's Kit's view. But to come to Lauren's point, Carol, if you can.
So the next point was I've forgotten already.
The locals.
How do you measure inclusive growth?
Again?
How do you measure inclusive growth?
We've got, again, there are reports that look at the spillover effects, right? There are reports, so a good example would be the report we had commissioned, specifically by Cardiff University's Economic Group, of our impact within South Wales, and it's quite substantial. Right? Okay. We've helped, and what I'd like to do is take the impact we've done in South Wales and replicate that in your region. We're there next week to roll out a similar programme, replicate it in Scotland, replicate it in Northern Ireland, replicate it in Bristol, replicate it down in Torbay. So we got good evidence.
Okay, that's great. Sorry, we're running out of time. Is it on this issue, this specific question?
No, it's on the issue of local authorities.
Very quickly.
Linking it back to, we saw the presentation from Starship Robots. They were very, very at the beginning. I hope you were able to be here for that. They were very clear about the role of local authorities and combined authorities. There was a challenge put to us by the previous panel about what the innovation and growth challenge and funding should be to combined authorities and local authorities. I wanted to understand specifically from Lou and Mike what you feel in terms of that question. How do we make local authorities more open to innovation, to work alongside companies, to grow and to take risks, as we saw, and what official role should combined authorities have?
Now we're expanding the remit for these last 2 points, so changing the funding model, local spillovers and what should local authorities, or how should local authorities be funded to drive innovation?
And how they become more less risk averse to new technologies like Starship.
Yeah, Mike and Lou.
So
you don't have to answer the whole question.
No. Well, very quickly, I don't know about the digital because we frankly don't use it, but the 300 or so businesses that leverage both of the high-value manufacturing catapults in our region, if the catapults were disbanded, and it's about enhancing their technical capability, if that went away, we need an alternative, as I said earlier, to that mechanism to help develop the capabilities of those businesses. So, and funding might help, but it is actually a resource. And by the way, to your question, one of the catapults has actually gone in to assist us in, the Black Country is an area of challenge, and we've set up a satellite catapult in the Black Country to do precisely that. So I think it's as long as we leverage the opportunities. To the final point. In terms of local authorities, I think if they understand the ecosystem, if they understand the ecosystem that we've developed, And one local authority is going to have we're probably bigger than most. So we have to think about scale. But if a local authority has got a particular challenge, and I'll go back to the Black Country, we can tailor the support out of the total ecosystem in the combined authority to help that specific. So in the innovation accelerators, for example, we mandated that anything that went into a particular local authority, once that worked, and of course it's a pilot, so it may not work, but hopefully it did work, that can be translated to other local authorities for their benefit and outside the region if when it's appropriate. So I think I would say it's a horrible word, but it's a symbiotic thing. If the local authority can identify its need and can access the network, the local authority can be helped.
Isn't its need also to promote the local economy?
Absolutely.
This is what I'm trying to get to. It's not about necessarily, but that risk profile for local authorities, for combined authorities, to take something like Starship robots and say, actually, let's try it out. Let's be co-developers on this. Let's give you the access to the disability groups. And this is what it's not really profiled in the devolution white paper in the sense that that's what the role should be. But as a former local authority leader, it should be at the heart. If we care about our residents, it's not just about filling potholes, it's about growing the business, having the skills and having that strategic overview.
Agreed.
That's what I'm trying to challenge you on, is particularly West Midlands and Manchester that have been there for longer than most in that sense, but not very long time. How do you create that devolution framework and that funding framework that allows you to drive that innovation rather than doing a top-down through UKRI regional innovation, doing it from bottom up, these combined authorities and local authorities?
Thank you, Emily. And I do want to add that I think in Liverpool we saw that with the innovation ambition to have 5% of GDP on innovation from Liverpool, that was a local or regional authority sort of taking a real innovation leadership there. So, Lou, we are going to leave you the last word here, and you have 3 big questions to answer in 2 minutes. So I'm sure you're capable of doing that.
Yeah, I'll bounce through. I'll maybe work backwards and start with the local authority point. So I think it's a really important point. Innovation is complex, it's messy, and it requires topic expertise. The way to empower local authorities to think and apply the knowledge that they have of their own economy is to build that muscle memory. So, Mariana Mazzucato talks a lot about this, and let's not deplete local authorities of that capability. Part of the way you build that capability is collaboration with UKRI, Innovate UK, universities, industry, people who bring that, and you work as a collective. They also have immense procurement capability, as does national government, which is hugely powerful at issuing those first contracts that create business confidence. So really passionate that we crack that actually in the next phase of devolution. I can say this because I don't have a Catapult and I don't run a Catapult. I think it's absolutely legitimate to challenge what the success measures of Catapults are based on the current economic needs. I think that's completely justifiable. Also, we're in the innovation business, right? So we should be able to innovate new formats. That's what the innovation accelerators were. And thinking about the needs of our economy as it changes and really challenging ourselves on those models, I think is perfectly justified, especially where it's public money. And then on inclusive growth, I think this is quite granular, actually, and this is why it's complex and people don't always like to do it. And it creates an accountability. But actually, you have to look at who gets the jobs, who moves from long-term unemployed households into economies and opportunities that they didn't know existed. And that's not just about traditional skills pathways, but it's also how you collaborate with industry and how at a very hyper-local place you incentivise and you collaborate to create opportunities for neighbouring communities. And so I think actually beginning to put that front and centre of what a success measure is is quite radically different, and we can learn from lots of organisations like the B Corp movement and lots of global movements.
Can you measure?
Because you measure demographic data as to, you know, physically which geographies.
Can we see how that can be measured?
And it's one of the things we're working through in the new innovation capability of the university, and obviously we have an abundance of brilliant academic minds in our Productivity Institute and behind us from a research capability. So actually I think lots of people are talking about inclusive innovation. The question is now, how do we deliver it, and how do we model that, and how do we show that it's not growth or being inclusive? Actually, the two things work really symbiotically together.
Excellent. Well, that's a fantastic note on which to finish this session. I think that's what we're all united with the government and in this committee in looking for long-term inclusive and sustainable growth, and it's really good to hear what some of the barriers to that and some of the measures of that and some of the ways in which we can test that going forward. So thank you very much to our panel, and this session to an end. Order.